Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal News Hour. I have the headphones on today because we're going to be listening to some videos. Well, one video specifically. Maybe two. But happy Monday, everyone. May is disappearing. I can't believe it's already May 12th. Like, I was looking today and a bill came through and I'm like, didn't I just pay that? Yes, last month. May is just evaporating before our very eyes. Today's the 12th. We're already going to be almost, to the last phase of the month by the end of this week. It's just absolutely insane. And so much has been going on. If you got Saturday's newsletter, if you're not on the newsletter for Saturday, you should be. CameronScholl.com/newsletter. Because we cover all sorts of great stuff, like the new Pope, Leo the 14th, was announced. And so Saturday's newsletter was titled Habemus Papam, which means we have a Pope in Latin. And that was, so that, I mean, there's just been so much, going on. And today Trump took a gift of a Qatari plane, worth $400 million that he'll be using instead of the Air Force One we pay for, sort of thing, although somehow we'll end up paying for that. And so, yes, there's just a lot's been going on, a lot's been happening, a lot of narratives, a lot of news, and just, kind of so much going on. So it's, a lot happening, a lot of different things. Personally, it's been a lot of fun. I have made some important decisions about kind of the future of the Cameron Journal here, and I'm not going to talk about them necessarily right now because I want to kind of implement them first and all this type of thing. But we're going to be making some changes and kind of moving away from the way things have been done for the last decade, and emphasizing video and the newsletter more, as opposed to some of the long form articles that I'm used to doing and all this type of thing. And this is mostly due to changes with Google search and AI. So when I started on this journey in 2014, getting Google right was vitally important to ranking at all. And it was very difficult to really get any traction if you weren't doing something with Google. And so I spent a lot of time on SEO and backlinks and all this stuff that makes SEO happen. And the reality is, with AI, the primacy of Google search is coming undone. And so now it's more about, building your own audience, having your own audience, advertising places, discovery, all this type of thing. And so we're going to be moving in that direction. I'm also going to be adding in some new video platforms. Right now, as far as video goes, I only do stuff on YouTube. But there are other video platforms like Rumble and Odyssey and Dailymotion, which I was on years ago. And my first viral video was on Dailymotion. And so I'm going to start incorporating those video platforms in as well. And hopefully we'll be able to automate some of that, but we'll see. And so, so there's some changes with that coming up, but you'll start to see them being implemented over the next couple weeks as I change the front of the website to kind of reflect the new view of how I think we're going to do content moving forward. And then there'll be a lot more emphasis on the newsletter and packaging articles kind of more with it, and content more within that context, and more video, both long form and short form. I have a pile of video scripts that I need to record, and we're going to start doing that sort of thing. I'm also going to try to finally finish the audiobook versions of some of my fiction, get that out there, all this type of thing. So really great stuff. So that's kind of where we're focused on. at the current moment in terms of housekeeping stuff. I have a bunch of new podcast content for you. Which is really exciting. If you've been following me on Instagram at Cameron Cowan, you'll notice that I did a new podcast called Just a Dude, and we had a lot of really great and productive conversation. So that appearance is out now, so that's really great. So there's a lot of things happening, there's a lot of things going on, but without further ado, let's turn to the headlines. So we're going to do that, but we're also going to come over and do this. Oh, you can tell it's late in the day. I'm yawning already at the start of the broadcast. So it's been a Monday in America. So one of the first things we're going to talk about from today, is the white South Africans getting refugee status by Trump, and they're beginning to arrive, and here they are, with luggage and their children and all this sort of thing. President Trump had halted essentially refugee admissions on his first day in office before creating a pathway for Afrikaners, a white ethnic minority that had ruled during apartheid. It says here the first plane carrying white South Africans who received refugee status from the Trump administration landed at Washington Dulles International Airport on Monday morning, according to a flight tracking website. The arrival marks a drastic reversal in the United States refugee policies, which have long focused on helping people fleeing war, famine, and genocide. President Trump essentially halted all refugee admissions programs on his first day in office before creating a pathway for Afrikaners, a white ethnic minority that ruled during apartheid in South Africa, to resettle in the United States. The group that arrived Monday on a U.S.-funded Omni Air international charter flight say they've been discriminated against, denied job opportunities, and have been subject to violence because of their race. 49 Afrikaners boarded the flight on Sunday, according to a spokesman for South Africa's airport authority. More than 8,000 people expressed interest in the program. There are scant details available about the individuals who arrived in the United States. The South Africans who reached the United States on Monday had received expedited processing by the Trump administration, waiting no more than 3 months. Refugee resettlement before the first Trump administration took an average of 18 to 24 months, according to the American Immigration Council, an advocacy group for immigrants. Mr. Trump said on Monday that the United States was extending citizenship to these individuals who he said were victims of a genocide. Quote, "Farmers are being killed," unquote, he told reporters. "They happen to be white. Whether they're white or black makes no difference to me. White farmers are being brutally killed and the land is being confiscated in South Africa." Police data does not support the narrative of mass murder. From April 2020 to March 2024, 225 people were killed on farms in South Africa, according to the police. But most of the victims, 101, were current or former workers living on farms who are mostly black. 53% of the victims were 53 of the victims were farmers who are usually white. The refugee program has exacerbated tensions between the United States and South Africa, whose government has rejected the Trump administration's claim that Afrikaners are eligible for refugee status. Quote, "It is most regrettable that it appears that the resettlement of South Africans to the United States under the guise of being refugees is entirely politically motivated and designed to question South Africa's constitutional democracy," Crispin Fury, a spokesman for South Africa's foreign ministry, said in a statement. Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, who has overseen the administration's immigration policy, said the situation in South Africa, quote, "fits the textbook definition of why the refugee program was created." Quote, "This is persecution based on a protected characteristic, in this case race," he said. "This is race-based persecution." And so, and they go on, they suspended all aid to South Africa and all this sort of thing. So this is starting, it'll be happening as time goes on, and it was a big story because they were arriving today, right alongside the plane from Qatar. So one of the that's kind of a small anecdotal story to kind of get us into the news. However, the really big story is there appears to have been a breakthrough on the China trade war situation. Now, no one is happier about this than me because we cannot have the world's two largest economies not trading with one another. And before we dive into the kind of the bits of the story, I want to kind of show what has happened in terms of the ports and how these
over my shoulder here. I'm looking out at
the port
of Seattle right now, and we currently have no container ships at berth. And that happens every once in a while in normal times, but it is pretty rare. And so to see it tonight is, I think, a stark reminder that the impacts of the tariffs have real implications. It means that we don't have longshore workers on the dock right now unloading merchandise. We don't have trains taking that merchandise to inland ports and all the way across the country to places like Des Moines, Iowa, and Chicago, Illinois. And that's hundreds of jobs right here in our region and across the country.
You have none at your port right now?
We currently do not have any container ships at port right now. That's correct.
And that's because just nothing is being shipped over? I mean, that's pretty remarkable.
Well, it is. It's pretty unusual. We do anticipate, I was looking at our schedule, we anticipate about 25 vessel calls between here and the port of Tacoma over the next 7 days. And keep in mind, we're not just importing from Asia or just China. We do have activity from all over the world, largely the Pacific Rim, but we are seeing a significant drop in container volume through our gateway.
You said this is rare. I mean, can you think of the last time that this happened, that you didn't have any of them coming in at your port?
Probably the height of the pandemic was the last time I saw it, before we really started to see the surge in cargo towards the end of the pandemic.
And that's Seattle sort of thing. And how, and as someone who used to live in downtown Seattle within sight of the port, it not having any ships at all, and who lived through the pandemic and them stuck in the Sound not being able to be unloaded because the ship port was full, having lived through this sort of thing, it is incredibly unusual. It's a huge financial loss for the port of Seattle-Tacoma as well. People don't really think about that, but ports make money by charging fees for ships to call there. And so, yeah, you have, it affects everything downstream, but Seattle's not the only story. Now, this was from May 7th, so he said there was going to be some ships over the next 10 days. So there are some ships now, but this was posted on the 7th. So then we go over to this YouTube video, and we dash down to LA.
Slow, so it's taken a while for the tariffs that President Trump imposed a few weeks ago to actually kick in, but now they are kicking in. Here in the Port of Los Angeles, normally the busiest port in the country, they have seen this week a 50% drop in the ships coming in from China.
A trucker who last week was hauling about 4 or 5 containers a day, this week will likely haul just 2 or 3.
Why? Because there's a 145% tariff on most of that stuff. So what's that going to mean for the Port of LA? For the people who work here, the longshoremen, it's going to mean less money. It's going to mean less overtime. For the truck drivers, it's going to mean maybe in the past they were doing 4 or 5 loads a day. Now they're maybe going to do 2 or 3. There's a lot of anxiety here. People are worried. People don't know what's going to happen.
We can see right now this cargo volume will be light for the weeks and months ahead.
There's uncertainty and a lot of anxiety.
So, bearing all that in mind, we then kind of get into the, okay, we maybe kind of sort of have a deal. What does that mean in real terms? And so Ben Masalas from Midas Touch, I think, summarizes the situation very well. We went from 145% tariffs against China to 30% tariffs after Trump told us for months that 100% tariffs and no ships coming to the port was brilliant. We screwed with the lives of workers and small business owners and shattered consumer confidence. And got what exactly? So, and this one points out that China had an average tariff of 7.2% on U.S. goods last term. It's now 10%. The U.S. had an average tariff of 3.8% on Chinese goods. It's now 30%. So either way, things are going up. So then, understanding what the situation has been with these tariffs and the reduction in trade, people ordering less stuff, small business owners having to come up with money for taxes, all this type of thing, we then move over to the tariff announcement. And it says here, the United States and China took a step on Monday to defuse the trade war between the world's 2 largest economies, agreeing to temporarily reduce the punishing tariffs they had posed on each other. The move by the United States, after President Trump had repeatedly declared we would not lower tariffs without concessions from China, represented acknowledgement of the cost of all-out trade war with China. Despite the White House's bluster, the Trump administration backed off for now from its steepest tariffs and agreed to hold more formal talks with Beijing after companies and consumers started showing signs of economic strain. Explaining that many of the tariffs he imposed remain in place, Mr. Trump said the White House on Monday that talks would be focused on a part of opening up China to American businesses. He said that he expected to talk to President Xi Jinping of China this week, but that putting a full deal on paper would take a while. We're not looking to hurt China, Mr. Trump said. In a joint statement released earlier in the day, the United States and China said they would suspend their respective tariffs for 90 days and continue negotiations they started this weekend. They were in Geneva, by the way. What a lovely place to negotiate a trade deal. Under the agreement, the United States would reduce the tariff on Chinese imports to 30% from its current 145%, while China would lower its import duty on American goods to 10% from 125%. So things look like this. So with this helpful graph, so this is the American pattern. So on February 1st it was 10%, then on March 3rd it was 20, then April 2nd it was 54, then April 8th it was 104, April 9th it was 145, and it's been 145 for a month and a couple days until today when it goes down to 30. So that's kind of been the shape of what's happened over the last 3 months or so. Then China did 10% on natural gas, coal, and farm machinery on March 4th. On February 4th, on March 4th, U.S. food and agricultural products, 10%. Then April 4th, everything went up to 34%. Then April 9th, 84. April 11th, 125. And today it's down to 10. So the current situation we stand is that our tariff is 30%, China's tariff is 10. So here's kind of what's funny. When we export goods to China, the tax is less than when they export goods to us. So we actually end up paying more. The American consumer ends up paying more for Chinese goods than the Chinese consumer pays for American goods. The outcome of the frenzied negotiations brought tariff rates close to where they were before Mr. Trump ratcheted them higher on April 2nd, which he billed as Liberation Day. However, the talks did not appear to yield any meaningful concessions beyond an agreement to continue discussions. Quote, "We have concluded that we have a shared interest," Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said at a news conference in Geneva, where the U.S. and Chinese officials met over the weekend. Quote, "The consensus from both delegations is that neither side wanted decoupling. China said it would suspend or revoke countermeasures adopted in retaliation for escalating tariffs. In early April, the Chinese government had ordered restrictions on the export of rare earth metals and magnets, critical components of cars, planes, and semiconductors. Mr. Bessent said the two countries might discuss deals for China to purchase more American goods. Such a deal could help narrow the American trade deficit with China. The agreement breaks an impasse that had brought much trade between China and the United States to a halt. Many American businesses had suspended orders, holding out hope that the two countries could strike a deal to lower tariff rates. Mr. Bessent placed blame on the Biden administration for failing to honor its commitments to the trade deal Mr. Trump reached with China during his first term. He said the current round of talks would aim for a more fulsome agreement. Chinese factories have experienced a sharp decline in export orders to the United States, heaping additional pressure on a sluggish economy. Chinese producers look to expand trade to Southeast Asia and other regions to circumvent the U.S. tariffs. Mr. Bessent said the tariffs had effectively created an embargo, something neither side wanted. The two countries had said continuing negotiations would involve Mr. Bessent, Jamieson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, and He Lifang, Chinese Vice Premier for Economic Policy, who led the weekend talks for the Chinese. In a research note, Mark Williams, chief Asia economist for Capital Economics, said the agreement was, quote, "another substantial retreat from the Trump administration's aggressive stance, because it does not include any commitments by China on its currency or trade imbalances." He also noted that there was no guarantee that a 90-day truce would give way to a lasting agreement, especially if the United States continued to try to rally other countries to limit trade with China. So, looking at the kind of overall rate here, because there was also a deal with the United Kingdom for 10% tariff. So China, we started at 10% in February. April, May, it was up. Now it's down to 10, and now we're a total of 30. Mexico, we're at 25. Canada, we're at 25. Although goods that fall under USMCA are not subject to the tariffs. European Union 10, Japan, Vietnam, South Korea, Taiwan, India, and the United Kingdom, all of which were in the 20 to 40% range, are all down to 10. So that seems to be somewhat of the new standard for most everybody. While a temporary reprieve from the shockingly high tariffs may be cause for celebration for businesses in both countries, the repercussions will still linger. Businesses are likely to encounter pent-up demand leading to higher transport prices as companies race to schedule shipments during the 90-day negotiating window. Global stock markets jumped with the announcement. The benchmark index in Hong Kong surged 3%, about the same for the S&P 500 in New York. Xu Weisheng, the president and chief economist of Pinpoint Asset Management, an investment firm in Hong Kong, called the agreement a good starting point for both countries. Quote, from China's perspective, the outcome of this meeting is a success as China took a tough stance on the U.S. threat of high tariffs and eventually managed to get the tariffs down significantly without making concessions. Mr. Besant and Mr. Greer said the two countries had substantive discussions on U.S. demands that Beijing crack down on the trafficking of the chemical ingredients used to make fentanyl. Mr. Besant said the Chinese, quote, understood the magnitude, unquote, of the fentanyl crisis in the United States and that there was a positive path forward. Mr. Trump initially imposed a 20% tariff on Chinese exports, accusing the country of not doing enough to stop the flow of fentanyl to the United States. That punitive tariff remains in place, along with the 10% baseline tariff imposed on China and nearly every other U.S. trading partner. Towards the end of Mr. Trump's first term and throughout the Biden administration, the average U.S. tariff on Chinese goods hovered around 19% and applied to about two-thirds of imports from China, according to the Peterson Institute for National Economics. The tariffs imposed in Mr. Trump's second term applied to all imports from China. The Trump administration has accused China of unfairly subsidizing key sectors of its economy and flooding the world with cheap goods. Mr. Trump has said China, quote, has been ripping off, unquote, the United States for decades with unfair trade practices that have decimated America's manufacturing sector and cost the country jobs. Wang Wen, dean of the Chongying Institute for Financial Studies in Renmin University in Beijing, said the agreement demonstrated the desire for both countries to avert the worst-case scenario. He said, China, quote, is better, unquote, at dealing with the tempo and style of the second Trump presidency compared to the first. In laying out the agreement, Mr. Besant and Mr. Greer were careful not to antagonize China. Instead, they placed most of the blame for the trade war on the Biden administration, accusing it of neglecting the trade imbalance. Mr. Besant suggested the two countries could help each other by balancing their economies, saying America could restore its manufacturing sector while China could still scale back its overproduction. The two sides have sparred in public in recent weeks. The White House repeatedly said it was speaking with Chinese officials, while Beijing denied such talks were taking place. Beijing initially took a hard line to Mr. Trump's punitive tariffs. Last month, Mao Ning, a senior Chinese foreign ministry spokesman, posted on X a video of a speech that Mao Zedong made during the Korean War, known in China as a war to resist U.S. aggression and aid Korea, in which he declared no matter how long this war is going to last, we'll never yield. China has carefully framed its involvement in the Geneva negotiations as not a concession to Mr. Trump's tariffs, but as a necessary step towards further escalation. China's Ministry of Commerce said the agreement was, quote, in the interests of both countries and the common interests of the world. And so everyone is seeing, everyone is kind of seeing this basically for what it is. All we've done is kind of reset to zero, slightly above for us, sort of same thing for them. As we read in that one tweet, the tariffs on both sides have ended up higher. The Chinese are saying, we haven't conceded anything, we just backed down because the Trump administration backed down. What and also what's going to be the framework for a trade deal with China over the 90-day negotiating period, and will Trump really stick to it? I think that's the biggest question, is given his propensity for just announcing a tariff here, a tariff there, tariffs everywhere, is he actually going to stick to the tariffs the tariff agreements that he puts in place? Is he actually going to stick to the deal? Or is he going to get a wild hair at 3 a.m. and decide, no, tariffs again, sort of thing? And that, I think, is probably the biggest question, probably the Chinese have, but I think the rest of us should be having. So, I mean, if you're a business right now and you're importing from China, your business planning is a disaster. I mean, it just is. It's a disaster. It's super unfortunate. It's just so impossible right now to figure out what's going to happen, what's going to come next. Everyone's going to definitely try to import what they can, while they can, at the cheap prices, all this type of thing. So, no ships today, but lots of ships next week. 21, look for ports being packed 21 days from now, which is early June. So, it's, that first week of June, the ports are going to be very, very busy as everyone tries to get everything in as much as they can before the 90-day truce expires and we have an agreement, a deal, or not. The Trump administration did say, and this kind of goes different than the New York Times story. There were officials in the Trump administration that did say that the Chinese offering to do more about fentanyl precursors was a bit of an upsell. They weren't really talking about that at this juncture, and the Chinese brought up the fentanyl thing. So I think the Chinese are thinking if they can offer something on fentanyl, then they can get a lot of other things. And so, honestly, I think this is kind of a win for China. I mean, obviously, economically speaking, they were, there's definitely, this was not helping their economic situation. I do agree with Bessent. They have a lot of overproduction. They've been flooding the world with cheap goods for years and years and years and making a lot of money off everyone else going out of business because their stuff is so cheap, and that's what's trying to be rebalanced. Trump is also trying to get other countries to do less business with China, which I don't think is going to happen, but it is definitely an interesting dynamic right now. There's a lot of questions moving forward, but overall it appears, I mean, to be honest, China kind of won this round. Now, what that means going forward is a very different situation, but if China figures that they can pretend to do something on fentanyl but get a trade deal in place that Trump might actually stick to, then China's going to leave the situation looking great. We're going to be still just like to look like we're a bully sort of situation, and that's where things may end in this whole story, but we'll keep tracking it for you. So let's move on. Speaking of immigration, so remember how I was talking about, we were talking with the Afrikaner refugees from South Africa coming in? I saved this tweet because I thought it was an interesting dynamic of those moments when you are, feel like you're losing the country because you're seeing something you don't normally see, or you see something you're used to only seeing in more developed countries. Now, bearing in mind, this person is a, quote, heritage American, schizophrenic journal posting, anti-fat nationalist. Well, I'm sorry, sir. And musings of a white man. So, let's bear in mind that this person thinks we need to live in a very white, homogenous, one-language speaking society when he says, no amount of technological luxuries we have at our fingertips is worth the fact that I hear 12 different languages at my Trader Joe's. And that, I think that probably reflects a lot of the popular rage about immigration, and I had written about this. I had watched, there was this show that was around for 6 seasons called Bob and Abishola, and it featured Nigerian immigrants, and one of the things that I noticed about Bob and Abishola was that the Nigerian immigrants in the show, which is like Abishola, her mom, her aunt and uncle, all this type of thing, were not really interested in integrating into American society. They were still very much maintaining their Nigerian culture, and this was just a place to work, to live, all this type of thing. Very different from immigration of the past, and I don't necessarily feel like that's a good thing, but I think one of the kind of problems I think with this, with just all the number of people we've had coming in over the last several years, is that you do get these situations where you do go and there's 12 different languages happening. Now, for some of us, I think that's a joyful thing. When I lived in Seattle, our voting ballots were printed in 25 different languages. Columbia City in Seattle is the neighborhood in any major city that has the most languages spoken, of just different people. I mean, everything from Japanese and Chinese to Amharic. I mean, just everything you can imagine. I think for the average person who isn't necessarily that well traveled, hasn't been exposed to different people, different cultures, all this type of things, is a heritage American, and nationalist, even an anti-fat nationalist. This is, for them, it feels like this is losing the country. that, you know, we live in America, aren't we supposed to speak English here? And it seems like no matter how far you go and no matter where you go, there's just fewer people speaking English. And the culture has become a lot more multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multilinguistic than it used to be. And this gets into the people who always say, you know, we're a country, not an economic zone, and all the, and, you know, different sorts of narratives. And I bring this up because I think there's a lot of frustration from people with immigration that feel like it's just been too much. There's just too much new people, new change, new languages, new culture, new everything, and things need to level out. And I say this to say we've been here before. This was the argument made in 1925 why Congress banned immigration and didn't change that till 1965. It was because of this exact dynamic. And so in this way, America's schizophrenic relationship with immigration is back to its historical baseline of, you know, in 1925 it was too many Italians, too many Slavs, too many Southern Europeans, too many, you know, Central Europeans, too many Czech, too many Poles, all this sort of thing. And now we're back to the, you know, there's too many languages. I can't go outside and not feel like I'm in a foreign country. And I think that is, I think that's a very important thing to bear in mind about why we're having the conversations we're having about immigration right now. Although to this person I would say, I hope you love people from South Africa because you're getting some new neighbors. So, that, as they say, is that. So, this tweet was kind of funny. So, I want to get into the quote-unquote woke right. So, one of the hallmarks of fascism, and one of the hallmarks of fascistic regimes, and something that they do brilliantly, is they take left-wing talking points, particularly on economics, and blend it through a right-wing lens. People forget that in Germany, it was not the... Nazi was an abbreviation. The actual name of the party was the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Or Nationalista Sozialist, what was it? Nationalistisches Deutsche Arbeiter Party. Yes, NSDAP. And there was, I mean, notice, German Workers' Party. Now, when you hear National Socialist German Workers' Party, you might think that that's a left-wing party. Well, it kind of is, because Hitler's program was to create good working conditions for Germans, but a specific ethnic German that did not include the disabled, Roma, Jews, especially Jews, the disabled, and many other people. And so, what I kind of find interesting about, you know, this idea, which is, bearing in mind, this is a tweet from the Babylon Bee, from the managing editor of Babylon Bee, so it's maybe not necessarily as serious as, you know, we should take it as face value, but satire is perfect because it exposes narrative. And as you know, I always talk about news as a narrative, that's why it's called a story. The thing about this narrative is there's a lot of people on the right, in MAGA, in Trump land, that want a lot of left-wing economic policy. Let's also remember that one of the biggest group of people that helped boost Trump was disaffected Bernie Sanders supporters. Now, someone might wonder, how does someone go from being a Bernie bro, and Bernie Sanders is a Democratic Socialist, how does someone go from a Bernie bro to being a Trump supporter? And I'll tell you very easily. Because Trump uses a lot of the same economic populism that Bernie Sanders does, just on different issues. So, if you're dissatisfied with the Democratic Party, who's over here talking about trans people in bathrooms and identity politics and all this type of thing, and you're kind of like, ooh, gross, but you want that economic populism, Trump offers that, but in a homogenous, pro-white, pro-straight, pro-family, pro-natalist framework that is much more acceptable. And it's gotten so bad with traditional conservatives being like, what happened to small government and free enterprise and entrepreneurship and reducing the size of government and less programs and all this type of thing, is going up against what people are calling the quote-unquote woke right, that are saying, no, we want economic populism. We want cheap money. We want good loan rates. We want government programs for us, but we want them to be for specific people, native-born, preferably white, Americans, and hence this narrative of the woke right wants all the liberal economic policies with none of the racial baggage, i.e. the mixed race liberty sort of thing. And so the woke right's a terrible term, and someone says this, woke right's stupid term, do better. And I would agree with them on that. It's certainly maybe not the best way to describe those people, but the common denominator here is the economic populism for a specific group of people. And that fundamentally is what fascistic regimes do well. They take left-wing economic talking points, blend them through a right-wing frame, and make them usually more popular than they ever were before, because and this has some historic references as well. It becomes more successful. One of the things that people forget about is in all of the social programs of the New Deal and post-war, those were for a specific subset of the population. FHA loans are not available to black people. The GI Bill is not available to black soldiers. A lot of those programs, initially housing projects were built for white families. Now, those white families got money and they moved to the suburbs eventually, and black people moved in, but it was all, there was even parts of New York where it was started out as, poor immigrant Jews, all this type of thing. They eventually moved to Long Island mostly, or Staten Island, and black people moved in. Black people were shut out of a lot of those programs. What made LBJ's Great Society so important in light of the Civil Rights Act was that you then had social programs specifically for black people, for everyone. You had, affirmative action and equal opportunity to really encourage employers to hire similarly qualified African Americans, all this type of thing. So the idea that we should have big government programs but only for white people, or social programs but only for a subset of the population, isn't even new. It's how we've usually run social programs in this country. And even new programs, if you're doing something that's going to help the black community, you can't necessarily say that. It's got to be for everyone, sort of thing, and if black people having to benefit, that's okay. Like, this is kind of how it goes. And so this idea that there are people who want economic populism, but only for white people, or only for a certain segment of the population who's been deemed worthy, is not even new. It's actually usually how things go in this country. The only problem is economic populism, even as Trump articulates it, is in contradiction to the economic paradigms, quite frankly, of the mainstream portions of both major political parties. The traditional Republican conservative idea has been smaller government, no social programs for anybody, you're on your own sort of thing. On the Democrat side, it's oftentimes been big government, but not always, and more social programs for everybody, but especially for minorities sort of thing. And there's been a big focus on the Democrat side for the last 15 years on, structural systemic racism and all of these things. And this is one of the reasons why the Democrat brand is so toxic right now, is because that's where the conversation has been. And people are wondering, when is it going to be good for us? And they don't necessarily, or they're not as invested in when is it going to be good for quote unquote other people. So this kind of throwaway tweet is emblematic of what it takes to make social progress happen in this country, what it takes to make economic progress happen in this country, and it has its own historical parallels. So I wanted to do a segment on the whole woke right economic populism thing, because it's very important to understand these different narratives and dynamics between the Bernie bros becoming Trump people, historically how homogenous social programs have been, and why you still have within the greater Trump movement this strong desire for economic populism. So you'll see probably more stuff about the quote-unquote woke right coming forward, and now you have some basis for that. Speaking of that, this is given what's happened with government and all this sort of thing, I wanted to I wanted to dig into this a little bit because this tweet has been going around, and I saved it to talk about the importance of government in creating the black middle class. And so here we have the main tweet that says 65% of black women with university degrees work for the government. Read that again. Not that 65% of all workers are black women, but that 65% of all college-educated black women are employed by the government. They literally have no job market. And the quote tweet says, "This is where I remind you that if it weren't for the government, academia, and affirmative action, there would be no black middle class." Now, the gut reaction to this is going to be, well, you're racist. But I'm going to say no. Hold back. Hold back. It's entirely correct. It is true. The vast majority of black people who have degrees tend to slot into government, academia, or some end of corporate, as this person meant. They're absolutely right. I mean, the black middle class has been, and the New York Times wrote about this with a lot of the government jobs being let go with Trump and everything, is that, no, it is absolutely true. The black middle class has been buoyed by government work. And this is everything from the State Department to the post office. You know, I mean, there's a lot of, a lot of people in the black community say, yeah, and especially when you get to the local government level, especially with a majority black area, it's people who work in the county clerk's office, people who run elections, people who collect the garbage, the postman, the people who fix the streets. I mean, it is a situation where if you're a black worker and you're going into the job market, government has always been a bit of a safe bet because you get a pension at the end. This is particularly true if you come out of the military. You get a pension at the end. The pay is good. It's reliable. They're not going out of business. You're not going to be the first to get laid off. It has been a much easier path to the middle class than many other pathways on offer. Now, I would kind of remind that 65% is a super majority, but that also means that 35% of black women are working elsewhere. And that person says, yeah, government, academia, and affirmative action sort of thing. But this idea that, black workers have no real job market, it's a sobering kind of thing to admit and understand. But the reality, and any black person will tell you this, and I'll even mention that, yes, when you're a person of color in the open corporate job market, it is really hard. And I didn't really understand that until I met someone who was a black woman who'd worked in both University of Maryland and also in big corporate. In her career, she's 10 years older than I am, and she had done that, and she had kind of started to tell me the horror stories, and I was kind of like, yeah, it's like I was, really, I've always, tried, so hard and been so qualified and all this type of thing, and it's, it's really tough out there, and she was kind of like, oh yeah, I've been flown out for interviews, and the answer's still no, and I've trained people that, advanced above me, and everyone is like, oh, why are you still in that same position? And I didn't really realize how crazy it was, kind of how bad it was, until I met someone who'd kind of been in the system. Because I've always been outside of the system. I've always worked at the local shop, the local business. I used to do marketing for local business owners. I worked in an auto shop. I've never worked in an organization with more than 150 employees, so I didn't really understand it. I just knew it was always hard for me to get a job, and she finally explained kind of how it was, and I was kind of like, okay, all right. And I think when you understand the level of discrimination kind of on offer in the open market, going into government and academia definitely makes a lot of sense, and it seems to be a much safer career move than trying and fail in a corporate system that doesn't want you around. My only question is, if no one wants to hire us, what are we gonna do? And there, the comment section is, hot garbage. But it's, it's been it's a difficult situation. And like I said, nothing here is wrong. Everything here is correct. But I think it belies a system in which, because government hiring is points-based and so cold, and it provides an opportunity for black people, so particularly educated black women, it provides an opportunity that is just not present elsewhere in corporate America, where one faces so much more discrimination and a distinct, lack of desire to have, someone who's not like us in the room. And I think that not like us dynamic is very important. So let's keep it moving along. Gonna take a drink. Now, this here I want to talk about because a lot of, especially more left-wing, shows do not necessarily want to take on what I like to call the Antifa problem. Now, I will say that in my capacity as a journalist, I have some contacts within that organization. I've also spoken to people in more right-wing organizations, and I've been on the record about that. So I do kind of know where these people, live, sort of thing. And one of the narratives within the right wing that happens a lot is how quote unquote dangerous, Antifa is, and how much, causing problems. And it can sometimes get into a situation where everything that goes wrong has to be an Antifa problem, and that's over the line. But I thought this whole idea was interesting because, well, let's start from the beginning. So, Andy Ngo, who's a great best-selling journalist, revealed that Antifa accounts are sharing a guide on how to make incendiary devices that will burn cables used in infrastructure, like on train tracks. Antifa and anarchist extremists believe that domestic terrorist attacks must be used to destabilize and destroy the state. And it has some examples here of the anti-civ arson booklet, and it shows burning cables for beginners, anarchists, all this sort of thing. Raw Egg Nationalist then replied and said, it's worth remembering, too, that Antifa types were talking on Reddit and Twitter about 3D printing train derailer devices during that long period when there were multiple derailments and chemical spills. This stuff is all about in the open, but never taken seriously. Why not? And he posts a picture of an account, Naomi Wu. It says, drone and 3D printer regulations are equally pointless as long as portable train derailers can fit in a duffel bag and a Acela Express goes through tunnels at 240 kilometers per hour with 300 plus passengers. Anyone who wants a body count can get one. And there's a picture of one here. And to answer the question why this stuff never gets talked about is because most of the time, so there's two problems. One is a credibility issue. One, Antifa knows about the media and journalism, even those of us who are independent, and they never want to go on the record. So then it's like, oh yeah, I got a report from my Antifa contact that they're doing this sort of thing. But you can't quantify it in a way that makes sense you can't prove anything meaningful, to say, oh yes, we know this is a thing, sort of thing. And that, is kind of the first problem. The second problem, and the commenter mentions it perfectly, is we have no idea who these people are. They can be anyone. Anarchist Federation News. Okay. That could be an Indian slop account, for all we know. That could be Chinese propaganda. I don't know who Andy is talking to, and I don't know that it says, no, he doesn't say where he got his sword. Like, it's just kind of like, yeah, this seems to be going on. And so why does no one take it seriously? Because we can't quantify any of this stuff. We can't actually go on the record with these people. No one's been arrested. We can't prove who they are. So you basically end up with rumors and conjecture, which is lousy journalism. And not to say that Andy's a lousy journalist, but right now we have rumors and conjectures. Now this here is rather interesting because it has, this website sort of thing. But as someone also pointed out, that there's, so I forget where someone pointed out down here, that it's, with this sort of stuff, the anarchist cookbook has been out for forever and ever and ever. The internet is full of this information. It has been since its earliest days. Someone also points out that a derailer like this only works at low speeds. If you want to derail a train at a high speed, you need something a lot bigger, that's a lot harder to move, all this sort of thing. And so, defining how much of this is actually real or not is dependent on NSA, FBI, and government sources. And so, to answer the question, why this stuff is all out in the open but never taken seriously, why not? We can't quantify it. We have no proof that any of those multiple derailments and chemical spills had anything to do with Antifa. They were mostly due to the ineptitude of the railroads. And trust me, they've been in office for 3 months. If Trump thought that Antifa could be blamed for East Palestine in Ohio, do you think he would keep his mouth shut? No. They would have it all over. Fox News would be on this like one on right. But right now, without anything, it's conjecture. This is a rumor. That's all this is. And so when people come to me and say, why doesn't the media cover this? And believe me, I get that question multiple times a week. This is why. I'm just going to send them a clip of this video. I'm going to make sure there's a clip. I'm just going to send them a clip and be like, we can't quantify it. It's rumors and conjecture. Get proof. Get someone to go on the record. Arrest somebody. Capture somebody. Find someone with a plot. And I'm sure the FBI spends billions of dollars working night and day to track this stuff. But I think, ultimately, Antifa, for the right, is a perfect, convenient boogeyman. They're nameless, they're faceless, and you can ascribe any evil thing to them that you want to. For the left, military militias serve the same purpose, let's be fair. They're nameless, faceless, and you can ascribe any evil thing to them. This cuts both ways. Historically speaking, when it comes to domestic terrorism does tend to come from the left more than the right. I said a couple months ago, I feel like we're going into a time of the lead, like Italy in the 70s, where we're going to have low-level terrorist attacks by independent people doing very terrible things that will kill people, and I think we're still facing that at a certain level. I do hope, in all of his wisdom, that Mr. Patel does a great job at the FBI and tries to shut that down as much as possible, but I do think we are going into a more dangerous period. I do think there is a risk of meaningful left-wing terrorism, as terrorism tends to come from the left more than the right. But I will say, from a news narrative perspective, Antifa is very convenient, because again, they're nameless, they're faceless, and you can ascribe any evil thing to them. And that's why all of this rumor and conjecture ultimately never goes anywhere. So, let's move on to the next story. And this has many people, this has to do with boomers and millennials and the cost of things. So, as many people know, I've written a new book called America's Lost Generation. It's finally going into production. So I'm wanting to talk about stuff to do with millennials and what happened to my generation more and more as we get ready for this book. If you'll notice at CameronJoel.com, we have a lot of new stories coming out about millennials. I'm going to have a lot of new videos being posted. I'm going to do some videos. I'm going to post some third-party videos. There's going to be a playlist. There's a lot of great new stuff coming in the Millennials collection. And This sort of discussion had been going around all weekend, and I really enjoyed it, so I wanted to kind of talk about it today. Um, a question in the chat. Let's see. Statistically, most of domestic terrorism has been dished out from the right-wing extremists. Not true. That's actually not true, and I'm going to tell you a story why. And something to read. And then we'll talk about boomers and inflation. So, when I did my graduate work in Norwich University, I did a whole paper called Domestic Terrorism. That essay is now at CameronJoel.com in my What the Hell is Going On collection, which is under politics, I think. When you look at terrorist groups, the left beats the right on the volume of terrorism by a lot. This started to be studied by Greenpeace terrorist activity in the 1970s. Now, people will say, yeah, but aren't there some really big standout examples of right-wing terrorism? Like the Oklahoma City bombing in 1985 was done by Timothy McVeigh, who was a white supremacist who'd been radicalized through magazines like Soldier of Fortune. Yes, absolutely. I'm not saying there's no right-wing terrorism. It's just less common than left-wing terrorism. So when we study these events academically and we look at incidences, body counts, even radicalization, which is a bit amorphous, we're looking at radicalization, statistically speaking, over time, the left wing is more likely to resort to violence in the form of terrorism than the right wing does. The right wing buys a lot of guns and talks a good game, but ultimately, they don't go out and do as much as we think they do. The left wing doesn't buy a lot of guns, they don't talk about it, but they're much more likely to go out and do something. And this gets into even environmental protest movements, climate change protest movements, all this sort of thing. The left, when it comes to terrorism, is very motivated, in a way that the right wing just simply isn't. And when you track them over time, even just in this country, but even across Europe and America, that tends to come from the left. Even in Italy, the time of lead, which I've referenced so many times, a lot of those were actually Italian communist terrorist attacks. It was not necessarily coming coming from the right. Now, when it comes to school shootings, school shootings are a bit of a different situation. School shootings are kind of all over the board. Some of the shooters are non-political at all. Some of them are very political. Obviously, the propensity of owning guns in this country makes the school shooting problem way worse. Most studies on domestic terrorism do not include school shootings, mostly because they didn't used to be that common. So when I was doing this graduate work in 2010, a lot of the big school shootings that we have lived through for the last 15 years had not happened yet. Not every school shooting is political in nature, but some of them are. Some even public shootings are political in nature. Take example, the guy who shot up the theater in Aurora, Colorado. And I was still living in Denver when that happened, in 13? He had a political manifesto. But not all shooters go that route, and so we can't necessarily quantify them. Yeah, and the Nazis called them socialists. Actually, it's funny you should say that, because I was talking about that earlier in the show. I was talking about the National Socialist German Workers' Party. We actually talked about that earlier. So, yes, the fascism is very good at taking left-wing talking points and blending it through the right. I would say that this dynamic that I'm talking about with left-wing terrorism is definitely a post-World War II situation. But again, to really look at this, you can go. I would recommend looking at two things. One is Italian communists doing bombings in the 70s, the resistance to the Franco regime in Spain in the 60s and 70s, and then also some cases in Britain in the 70s. Statistically speaking, the left tends to be better at terrorism than the right. Weirdly enough, you'd think it would be the reverse of those things. But any Italian communist in the 70s who was bombing buses or bombing school buildings or whatever have you would be very offended if you said that they were right-wing or that they were fascista. And they would, probably shoot you, sort of thing, and be very angry about that sort of thing. So I would encourage everyone, if you go to the What the Hell is Going On collection at CameronJoel.com and go to the domestic terrorism essay, I actually talk about this in depth with sources. I took my essay from grad school and adapted it to be a less academic sort of thing. And I would encourage you to go read that, because it is an interesting thing of how domestic terrorism goes down, how it works, and why so much of the way we talk about domestic terrorism has a lot of conjecture, and it's actually incredibly difficult sometimes to really deal with and tamp out. One of the things I propose at the end of the article that I still believe in is that we should have a government agency whose job is to prevent domestic terrorism. France, UK, and Canada all have agencies specifically for this job. We tasked the FBI, which is a law enforcement agency, into doing the job, and they've done it, I mean, obviously not terrible, because we haven't had a lot of terrorism, but they're not necessarily well-suited as an organization to do that job. And it takes a lot of work to infiltrate organizations, surveil organizations, and try to prevent them from harming people. And so, but I would encourage you, if you want to learn more about domestic terrorism beyond the conjecture of Twitter and quote-unquote why this is never taken seriously, I would encourage you to go to CameronJournal.com under the What the Hell is Going On collection and read the domestic terrorism essay. I will probably do a video on that essay and talk about this kind of more at length, and why things are the way they are, why certain dynamics are the way they are, and why the left is more motivated to terrorism and violence than the right. It has a lot to do with ideology, in terms of the left is usually trying to disrupt the status quo, and the right is trying to reinforce the status quo. So the right tends to be more defensive, whereas the left is more offensive, if that makes any sense. But I could do a whole hour on this. We're not going to right now. But see, now that's funny. I know people who think Middle Eastern terrorism is a left-wing ideology. It's not. It's part of of two extremist Islamic sects. One's called Wahhabism and one is called Salafism. I wouldn't say they're really political. That has more to do with their reaction to Western colonialism in the Middle East. So one could describe. I mean, that doesn't really fit a neat left-wing, right-wing binary sort of thing, but that's where Middle East terrorism, starts from. What are we considering terrorism? Would the KKK be considered a terrorist group? If you ask the Southern Poverty Law Center, absolutely. If we were to count, if you wanted to talk about the KKK as a terrorist organization, you would then be wanting to count specific instances of the KKK harming, killing, murdering, or bombing black people, black businesses, all this type of thing. And I mean, obviously lynchings were classified by the Obama administration as domestic terrorism. That wasn't true for a long time. That's something where in the formal academic definition, the KKK doesn't necessarily rate. I would certainly want to include them, because you have instances where the KKK did, another essay, if you go read Racism 2.0 in the What the Hell is Going On collection, I talk about many instances where they seized land, burned records, so they could steal land from black people, all this sort of thing. I mean, there's an aspect of that as well. And again, I'm not saying the right wing is free from doing terrorism. Far, far from it. They definitely do. And I would certainly consider group lynchings, burning of farms, burning of land, burning of records, all this type of thing as a kind of terrorism. But the reality is, compared to a lot of the things the left gets up to, those are still rather rare. Let's consider a more modern example. When we're talking about those climate protesters who go and throw tomato soup on paintings, there's not a right-wing equivalent to that. But left-wing climate protesters are very animated by that. Let's think of PETA protesters who wrap themselves in plastic and present themselves as meat and try to block traffic and all this sort of thing. The right tends not to protest in those same ways. They just don't. They tend not to, even if you look at, violent protest sort of thing, which, I mean, obviously I would say January 6th, 2021, it was a right-wing violent protest. One of the officers who was killed on that day just got a $13 million settlement. Well, not her family got a $30 million settlement from the Trump administration for her death on January 6th. I would say that is an example of right-wing domestic terrorism. We've never talked about January 6th in this way. But I would definitely classify it as that. But even with that, it's kind of a weird, like, even with something like that, it's severe because it was large and it was far-reaching and it was interrupting a democratic process. The reality is you end up with a lot more. I'll say this: the right tends to go big and fewer. The left tends to do smaller and more diffuse. So the number of instances is greater than the right, because the right tends to do really big stuff less often. Like the Oklahoma City bombing. That killed almost as many people as 9/11, including children. It was, if you're young enough, not young enough to remember, it was incredibly devastating. I mean, all building was just gone, sort of thing. I've been to the memorial in Oklahoma City. I mean, it was incredibly traumatizing, and we weren't used to attacks like that back then. In a post 9/11 world, it's a different story. But, it's, I mean, back then that was and the fact that, the guy, was caught because of an incorrect license plate on a highway is just absolutely, insane sort of thing. And there was a long trial, and he was, the trial was actually had in Colorado, which was really fun to grow up next to, sort of thing. And then, he was imprisoned and killed in Terre Haute, Indiana, which I think about every time I pass through Terre Haute, which I have many times recently. But people screaming obscenities out in front of the abortion clinic is freedom of speech. If they're on public land and not on private property, technically yes. Although if you're a poor woman who needs to seek out health care, one could definitely, you've been a victim of terrorism. Certainly. But we spent way more on that than I wanted to. Let's move on and dash through the last few stories. So, as I was saying, I'm getting into America's Lost Generation. I'm getting into talking about millennials and what has happened to us economically and kind of why things, are the way they are. And when I came across this, I was really surprised because there's a lot of people. Well, I'll say this: this post reflects two different views of what young people are going through, what millennials went through, even though most of us are well into our late 30s and 40s, and I think the youngest of us are 34, what Gen Z is going through right now, what Gen Alpha may very well face in 5, 6, 7 years when they're old enough to be in the job market and everything. And so let's start with the post and we'll get into the reply. So, this nice man said, "I literally drove a $50 truck in college. The seller even pulled the battery when I bought it. There were no rear brakes or horn or heat, and this was in Saskatchewan. Shut up and pay your dues." Now, my first reply is, I did a Colorado winter in a car with no heat, actually. My old van, the last couple years I had it, the last couple years I had it did not have heat, and I just bundled up and got a better coat sort of thing. The reply here, so I would say, okay, great, I lived in Denver with no heat. Fantastic. We're on the same level, Mr. Plumber. And the reply is great because it says, the boomer mind can't comprehend inflation. It's their version of per capita. And the resulting discussion is talking about how the $50 truck doesn't exist anymore. There's nowhere you can go and buy a $50 truck with no brakes, no horn, no heat. It's not about paying your dues. And this is especially true for millennials. We're in our 30s. We've paid our dues. Like, we've been out here working jobs, having children, you know, well, not me having children, but I have friends who have children. We've been out here doing the thing, and everything costs so much that it's incredibly difficult to even hope to think about getting ahead because of just how much more things cost. And I kind of enjoy this, addition to the main post. It says, for the record, I don't hate boomers. I just can't understand why they're so reluctant to acknowledge that inflation has destroyed most prospects for younger generations. They didn't feel the effects of inflation nearly as much as we have because they also had asset inflation that helped mitigate its effects. Boomers without assets are also in the same boat, and they're the ones who are the first to tell you how devastating inflation has been. And also people point out, this truck was illegal, it wouldn't pass an inspection, and there's different replies like, the millennial Gen Z can't comprehend compromising on comfort, convenience, looks, features, making repairs to nurse a cheap vehicle. I'm not saying the market is rife with old beaters held together with chicken wire for many reasons, but the kids wouldn't buy them regardless. And that's not true because my car was held together with wire for years. And other people, I mean, I've watched friends drive shit boxes along the way, all this sort of thing. No, it is giving. I used to walk 200 miles barefoot, uphill both ways, but I mean, it is giving that same energy. And the reason I saved this post, I want to talk about this, is this attitude is exactly what I talk about in America's Lost Generation. And the economic of when you have people left behind economically, the resulting devastation is insane. And that's why in the book I talk about Japan and what happened to them in the 90s and what has happened to millennials and to Gen Z. And it took so long to write the book, I had to start writing about Gen Z kind of towards the end to make it a little bit more relevant. And getting into Nietzsche and hikikomori, and how dating has been broken, how the economy has been broken, and how society has just changed so much that, and this is a great segue into this comment, I would love to pay dues if it actually meant anything. And I've lived this story too, and I've mostly worked for myself, but when I have worked for other people, I faced low pay. I had a job where the only reason I could afford to work there was because I rented a room in a basement from a lady with no bathroom and no kitchen. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to afford to work there, at all. And so there's a lot, especially Gen Z, they definitely feel this. I mean, us millennials, we got duped. We tried for a long time and thought if we just worked a little bit harder, saved a little more, tried a little harder, it would do something. And a lot of us are old enough, and I happen to know who this person is, and he's older than I am, happen to know that it was a lie. And Gen Z, who's had a chance to watch their older millennial cousins try and fail a lot of stuff, also knows how true that is as well. And, yes, I would love to pay my dues if it actually meant anything. And that is the hard thing where inflation has been so dangerous. I'm not talking about the inflation we've had since the pandemic. I'm talking about the inflation we've had over the last 50 years. Things are just more expensive today, but wages have not gone up. I didn't save the post. Thank you so much. Congrats on the book. Thank you so much. I didn't save the post and was talking about how wages have gone up 29% since 1979. And I saved the graph because I'm going to do a post about it. But the wages have gone up since 29% since 1979. That's all fine and well. Everything else that you need to live has gone up 3 and 4 times that. So even with wage increases, the cost of things has gone up so much, you still can't afford it, you're still not catching up. And the worst part is that the extra wealth, because it's not like we haven't been making money in this country the whole time, that extra wealth has not gone into the pockets of the everyday person. It's gone into the pockets of the 1%. And most of it's gone into the pockets of the 0.1%. I mean, it is not a system that is built and meant for human thriving. It is built and meant for shareholder thriving. And one of the things I talk about in my essay from the What the Hell is Going On collection, How We the People Became We the Corporation, is exactly how companies and government bought how corporations bought government in order to create policies that would allow that to occur. One of the reasons why the middle 20th century was so fruitful and why this scenario was even possible was because governments took the middle class seriously. Now, that was built on the shoulders of unions and the labor movement and things that happened in the lead up to World War II. But the reality is those gains in worker pay, compensation, healthcare, all this type of thing, allowed a thriving, broad-based middle class to flourish, and it allowed a vast majority of boomers when they were young to do fabulously well. They were able to get great jobs for, with a handshake. They were able to do, and save money and invest and buy houses and all this type of thing. And that's why, this is so good. Like they, with the assets versus no assets, is that, it's like you were able to participate in capitalism to such a degree, you gained assets and now you don't care. And you're wondering what's wrong with young people today. They don't have money. It's literally that simple. It's not complicated. And the money that should be in their pockets is in yours. In the value of your house, the value of your stocks, the value of the retirement, and in the value of the companies that make that possible. That's where the money is. Which is why, as we go through one of the biggest transfers of wealth in human history, it's going to get real interesting as the boomers finally begin to die off and these assets start moving on to Gen X and millennial children, and they start to move through the system and get sold off. You're going to see wild fluctuations in asset prices. You're going to see crazy things happen in the housing market because you're going to have houses being sold, people trying to buy a house for the first time. I mean, it's going to be insane as this wealth moves through because it's not going to be stagnant anymore. It's going to start moving through the system. It's going to be looking for places to invest. It's going to be looking for things to buy. And that is another topic for another day, but it's going to get real crazy around here. And so, like I said, each news hour, I want to start talking about this more in support of the book. If you want to find out more about the story of millennials, please head over to CameronJournal.com and click on Cameron's books. It's pre-ordering right now for $14.99, and I could use some pre-orders because it's been so long to get this book out into the world. So, if you love that, please do. And if you want to read more about this, please click on the Millennials tab, and I have a bunch of new stories coming out. I've kind of collected some old stories I had, some of which made it into the book, and then I have had a bunch of new content on millennials lately. And obviously, you can get all of this emailed to your inbox by signing up for the newsletter while you're there. So you can go to CameronJournal.com/newsletter, or just wait for the pop-up. There's one on the front page, and you can sign up. So, we are way over time because we got into domestic terrorism. So we're not going to talk about that. We are going to talk about Melania Trump, though, because that's fun. And we should have fun from time to time. And we're going to talk about Harvard anti-Semitism. So let's do Melania. So, I've always said Melania is the perfect autocrat's wife. And she is. And this proves why. So, a most sensitive subject in the White House. Where is Melania? Mrs. Trump has spent fewer than 14 days at the White House since her husband was inaugurated 108 days ago. The lights never seem to be on and the shutters stay shut. As the weeks pass by at the White House, the corner of the residence long used by First Ladies remains dark, because the First Lady does not really live in Washington. Melania Trump vanishes from view for weeks at a time, holing up in Trump Tower in Manhattan or in Florida, where she can lie low at Mar-a-Lago. Administration officials say she's at the White House more than the public knows, but when exactly and for how long, these officials will not or perhaps cannot say for certain. It's like having Greta Garbo as First Lady. Mrs. Trump is expected to reappear in the Capitol on Thursday to unveil a postage stamp honoring Barbara Bush, the former First Lady, and to attend a ceremony for military mothers. But two people with knowledge of Mrs. Trump's schedule said she'd spent fewer than 14 days at the White House since her husband was inaugurated 108 days ago. Others say that even it's a generous estimate. Officials in the East Wing and West Wing declined multiple requests for comment for this article. That the First Lady's whereabouts is among the most civil subjects in the White House only adds to the intrigue. Quote, "We haven't seen such a low-profile First Lady since Bess Truman, and that's going back in living human memory nearly 80 years ago," said Catherine Jellison, a historian at Ohio University whose research is focused on First Ladies. She said that, like Mrs. Trump, Mrs. Truman spent much of her time running back to, quote, her home base whenever she had the chance, unquote. In Mrs. Truman's case, it was Independence, Missouri. Quote, "She just liked her kind of own private world," Ms. Jellison said. The same is true of this First Lady. She's hired staff to work for her in the East Wing, but she rarely goes into the office. Even regulars at Mar-a-Lago say they don't often see Mrs. Trump around the premises. Every marriage has its highs and lows, but as with so many other things, the Trumps are in a league of their own. In the span of just a few months last year, the couple endured a public trial about his philandering, 2 assassination attempts, and a presidential campaign. The trial, which concerned hush money around Donald J. Trump paid to a porn star, made for a especially challenging moment for the couple, 2 people with knowledge of their dynamic said. Mrs. Trump kept well away from the courthouse in Lower Manhattan and from the campaign that kicked into high gear in the weeks that followed. The attempted assassination of her husband over the summer, and a subsequent incident in which the gunman got close to Mr. Trump on one of his golf courses, deeply spooked a woman who already worried about her family's safety and had been for years, according to 2 people familiar with her thinking. The first time President Trump was inaugurated in 2017, she was concerned about even getting out of the car to walk in the parade. At the White House this time around, Mr. Trump has taken to performing some duties that typically would fall to a First Lady. She's not the one carefully selecting light fixtures for the White House residence, redesigning the Rose Garden, greeting tour groups in the East Wing, or hosting receptions for the Women's History Month. He is. It's been a decade since husband and wife rode that golden escalator down the national political life together. Now he has come into a moment when she finds himself flush with power and self-confidence like never before. And yet, as he expands, she shrinks. Mr. and Mrs. Trump do share one common approach to public office, though. They both know how to make money from the exposure. In January, Mrs. Trump launched her own cryptocurrency token. "You can buy Melania now," she wrote on social media the day before her husband's second inauguration. And then there's the deal she struck with Amazon, reported by about $40 million, for a documentary offering a behind-the-scenes look at her life as First Lady. What might that show? It's hard to say exactly. And this is why she's the perfect autocrat's wife. You never hear what Mrs. Putin is up to. Putin's wife lives in Switzerland, actually. And his daughter, I think, spends most of her time in St. Moritz. She is, we know she does not like this job. We know that she does not like the public spotlight. We know from recordings of her phone calls from the first term, she thinks 98.8% of the shit the First Lady does is meaningless bullshit she has no desire to do. Every single time she appeared for the Trump campaign, she was paid $200,000. Now, that's a great way to launder money from the campaign to your family, and Trump's a grifter. But the reality is, she doesn't show up without a check because she doesn't want to do any of this stuff. She's not interested at all. And I think that just really makes her the perfect autocrat's wife because she stays out of the way of him and his politics. She's never out there on anything. She never has to be, that involved. Never, very rarely comes to his defense, although she does sometimes. Her silence speaks volumes. And get a good look at this face. This is a face that says everything while the lips are closed. Like I said, I thought it was a fun story to get into. The last story we're gonna do is about the Harvard anti-Semitism thing. This story comes from the Free Press, which is a great publication. And it's this reporter has compiled some of the things from the Free Press report, and this summary is really great. I've watched this video. We're not going to watch it right now in the interest of time. And we're going to kind of just go over the basics. And it says here that the Free Press report compiled their most disturbing instances from Harvard's anti-Semitism report, which Harvard compiled following the pro-Palestinian protests on Harvard campus. Not a single instance she discusses describes actual anti-Semitism, but rather students receiving pushback for expressing support for Israel's treatment of Palestinians, some of which was inappropriate and uncivil if true, but not violations of the Civil Rights Act. For example, students were ghosted by friends because they were presumably pro-Israel views. That's something that happens when people, especially young people, disagree on subjects they care passionately about. That's not a civil rights violation or anti-Semitism. I, too, have lost friends over my perspective on this issue, and I didn't consider trying to weaponize civil rights law to punish them. because they have a right to their views, however aberrant I consider those views. A student was told Zionists aren't welcome. Rude, inappropriate, but not anti-Semitism. Zionism was a political philosophy, not a race or religion. A professor said that the discourse on the subject of Israel-Palestine is saturated with the pro-Israel viewpoint. Not anti-Semitism, not even close, and obviously also true. At privilege trainings, the instructor said Palestinians were more oppressed. That's a viewpoint about a political issue, and one shared by any number of human rights organizations and scholars. You might disagree and think privilege trainings are ridiculous. This person does, I tend to agree, but that's not anti-Semitic. And remember, according to the Free Press propagandist, these are the worst incidents she's recovered in the report. Now, I don't think the Free Press is doing propaganda here. I think they're doing great reporting. But this also goes to show, again, there's the narrative and the reality. And when you dig into this stuff, and again, I'm not gonna watch the video because I've already watched it. We're over time. But when you dig into the reality of it, this stuff isn't great. I'm not happy that they went on, but it's not anti-Semitic. I mean, I agree here. Like, it's rude and inappropriate to say Zionists aren't welcome. That should not be said. Absolutely. No one should be going to a privilege training, and I don't necessarily agree with what was said, but these things are not anti-Semitic. And again, I always say this, criticizing the government of Israel is not anti-Semitic. Jews happen to run the government of Israel, but I don't care if purple people eaters run the government of Israel. I would criticize them for what they're doing in Gaza. Full stop. That's the end of the story. And the narrative is gone that anytime you say anything against Israel, the pro-Israel agenda, it's anti-Semitic. And that's not true. And if Harvard can't dig up something way worse than anything like this, then how much of a problem do we really have? And this reminds me of how Jeremy Corbyn got shoved out of the leadership of the Labour Party in the UK over anti-Semitism in the Labour Party that turned out to be completely baseless. It is a canard hauled out at any moment to get rid of anyone who might disagree with the dominant political narrative promoted by Israel through propaganda and through narrative. And that's, I mean, you also see the same thing, the Chinese going to do the same thing. It's not unique to them. It's the same propaganda playbook a lot of people play. You even see American propagandists doing this overseas in other countries or even within our own country. You see this of if you make criticizing any of it a terrible thing, then people criticize it less. And that's the point. And that's where the weaponization comes in. So in all the conversations we're having about the anti-Semitism on America's campuses, let's remember that is it really anti-Semitism, or is it people pushing back and using, in many cases, their free speech rights, although it might be rude and inappropriate, to promote their own point of view, which should be the point of a free and democratic society. And the question I'll leave you with is, why is it so dangerous for anyone to question it? That should give us all pause. Why is it dangerous to question any of this? And why do we have to accuse people of being anti-Semitic anytime someone questions this? I'm not going to go into that any further, but something to think about for the week. Thank you all for watching. We had a great group tonight. I appreciate it. Wonderful, lovely, active chat. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Cameron Cowan. This has been the Cameron Journal News Hour. Please feel free to catch me on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, Instagram, Cameron L. Cowan on Facebook, at Cameron Journal on TikTok, and at CameronJournal.bsky.social on Blue Sky. If you want to get the newsletter, make sure to go over to CameronJournal.com/newsletter and sign up for the Saturday newsletter. And all my social links are also at CameronJournal.com. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you want to be notified when I'm going to go live, please make sure to hit the notification button if you're on YouTube or Twitch. I will want to see you all back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. I am doing a live event with Michael Anderson. He appeared on the podcast a little while ago, and we had a great productive conversation on conservatism and liberalism and the Trump administration, and we're going to pick up that conversation tomorrow night at 6 p.m. and spend about an hour together live talking about it. So make sure to come back tomorrow at 6 p.m. I will see you all there. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Bye-bye now.